Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on today's webinar on transforming procurement practices. And to help guide you through these changes is our procurement expert, Nathan. Good morning, Nathan.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Yes, it's been a few months, hasn't it, since our last webinar. I hope we've all had a good summer. The warmth of summer is long gone now. We're feeling the bitter cold that's arriving with autumn and winter. But what better way, fellow wanderers in procurement land, to warm ourselves by thinking about the Procurement Act 2023. Thank you, Victoria. Looking forward to this session.
Yeah. I'm Victoria, for those that don't know me, and over the next 30 minutes, we will be diving into the key changes brought by the Procurement Act 2023 even, and what they mean for your organisation. We do have an amazing turnout today, so due to our limited time, we won't be able to answer your questions live, but don't worry, just pop them into the chat and as the webinar goes along, and we'll make sure to follow up via email after the webinar. Now, before we start, we are going to run a quick poll to see what are your biggest challenges in navigating procurement under the new regulations. So that will pop up shortly. There you go. Thank you for everybody who's responded to that poll. And it's really interesting that it's high on understanding the new regulations there, Nathan. So we obviously have got a lot of important content to cover, and I know Nathan is eager to get going, so let's get started.
I've not slept for 2 months, literally. I've been that excited.
And I bet that time's going to be extended, Nathan, because obviously the Act starts.
Yes, we'll get into that, Victoria.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Nathan, can you provide a brief background on the reasons behind the introduction of the Procurement Act 2023?
Yes, why are we here? Why the new Procurement Act 2023? Well, it all stems from Brexit. Do you remember that? That was some time ago now. Quite scary, actually, how long that was. So, yes, it all stemmed from Brexit. And obviously, as a result of Brexit, the UK officially left the EU. Now, the original procurement regulations were based very much on the EU procurement directives. In fact, it was the UK's transposition of those which created the Public Contract Regulations 2015. So it's provided an opportunity to review procurement at a UK level. Part of that exit also involved us joining the World Trade Organization government procurement agreement, which ensured continued international trade obligations around procurement. So the EU directives no longer apply, and therefore the government at the time set about creating a new Procurement Act, and that went through various iterations. There was lots of consultation. It took a couple of years. But on the 26th of October 2023, I'm sure King Charles was delighted to sign the new Procurement Act and give it royal assent. So we have been in a sort of a build-up for that. Lots of guidance has been put out. There's been lots of chatter and discussion about the new Act. Originally, the go-live date was due to be 28th of this month, October. For those who are not aware, the interesting and probably delightful news is the fact that there has been an extension to that now. So the new Procurement Act will not come into force until the 24th of February 2025. So that was a ministerial statement put out on the 12th of September. And the reason for that was the general election. So part of the Procurement Act sitting alongside that is something called the National Procurement Policy Statement. So the Act deals with the legislative law requirements around procurement. The National Procurement Policy Statement deals with policy. And of course, different governments may have different policy objectives. And so the new government decided we would like to review what was the Conservative National Procurement Policy Statement, and we need time to do that. And the intention is, therefore, that the new Procurement Act and the new Procurement Policy Statement, which complements that, and that you must have regard to when you're procuring, will be implemented on the 24th of February. So there's a little bit more time to prepare. And I think the majority of people I've spoken to have been, let's say, there was a collective sigh of relief at the thought of that 4-month extension. So that's the background. That's why the Act has come into force.
Well, there you have it. From Brexit to the Procurement Act. And we've navigated a whirlwind of changes.
Who thought you would have voted for that when you, if you did vote
exactly.
for Brexit? Yes, indeed.
With the Act now set to go live in February, and we're on that brink of a new era in public procurement, Nathan, in order to get ready, what are the key changes schools and trusts need to know about?
Yes, well, being a procurement professional as I am, I'm going to caveat this webinar. We don't have a long time. There is absolutely no way I can cover everything in detail. So this is very much a top level. But I think the first thing is just to quickly remind ourselves of the obligations under the old procurement regulations. So the current, I should say, soon to be old procurement regulations, PCR 2015, love it or loathe it. So in that, there are 4 different regulations that govern the procurement. There's the actual procurement regulations, utilities contracts regulations, concession contracts regulations, defence and security public contract regulations. So there's been lots of different sets of procurement regulations. There have been 7 different procurement procedures or routes: open, restricted, innovation partnership, competitive dialogue, the list goes on. Contract notices, there have been 4 types of contract notices. You may remember the PIN, prior information notice, the contract notice, the award notice. There has been an attempt at e-procurement or centralised management systems for procurement, but again, that's not really worked as yet. We'll come on to that in terms of the new regulations and other additional features around. There was originally an intention around something called the mystery shopper for reporting unfair procurement practice and the consideration of previous performance in supplier selection. So we've all sort of been living and breathing the procurement regulations 2015 for obviously, well, coming up 10 years. But moving forward, we now have obviously the new Procurement Act. So at a very, very top level, what happens is they've taken all those different regulations and unified it into one. That government have simplified it in a way which is quite astounding when you think about that. There are simplified procurement routes. So there are now just 3, which I'll expand a little bit more later, but open procedure still remains. We all love it. Competitive flexible procedure is a new one, so I'll come on to that. And in some limited, very limited circumstances, direct award. The big news and the big shock factor on the new regulations is the increased requirement around transparency. So we've gone from 4 notices, published notices, to 13, and that is a significant increase. We're talking about contract performance notices, where you have to publish information in relation to the key performance indicators of a contract in force once every 12 months. A contract change notice, if you're looking to set out and modify a contract termination notice to indicate that your procurement or your contract is terminated. A pipeline notice, so if your spend is over 100 million, in any financial year, you have to issue a notice within a certain amount of time in the new financial year, setting out specific information about any proposed public contracts with a value of more than 2 million. There's the tender notice, the PIN notice that has now become a planned procurement notice. There is a preliminary market engagement notice. There is a transparency notice. There is a contract award notice where you intend to award, and then a contract details notice where you are looking or where you have concluded an award. So if you're falling off your chair with the thought of all these notices, then I wouldn't blame you, because 13 different types of notices is going to be quite an interesting challenge, shall we say. There is this new central digital platform. So one of the requirements is the government has set up a new single digital platform where suppliers can now upload and maintain all their due diligence credentials in one place. That'll be a requirement. And the creation of a procurement review unit, the PRU, who will be the sort of auditors, I guess, in one sense of how procurements are run, but also manage something called a supplier debarment list, where any suppliers who have not performed or for whatever reason are barred from public procurement, they will maintain that process and that list. So yes, there's quite a few. I mean, that's very top level, so we'll go into a little bit more detail around that. So coming on to the next slide, key principles will be redefined as objectives. So under the PCR 2015, you may be familiar with some of the principles of procurement, which are transparency, equal treatment, non-discriminatory practice, and proportionality, all very good and favourable principles. Under the new regulations, these are now replaced with something called objectives, which is delivering value for money, which is a very obvious thing that you would want to do for public money. Maximising public benefit. Now, this is a really interesting one. That's been quite a lot of talking points around that. I think likely this is where social value comes into the process, and this is where it will link to the National Procurement Policy Statement around having regard to social value, having regard to the local economic benefit, having regard to small, medium enterprises, etc. Sharing information, and we've talked about all these transparency notices that are required, and acting with integrity. So, which I would hope everyone does in procurement, but there is an enhanced, let's say, process around things like conflicts of interest, for example, around that. So, yes, quite a few key changes. Some additional things. So we've mentioned the 13 transparency notices. So schools must follow these notices. There are a couple. A below threshold tender notice, which you wouldn't be required, and payments compliance notice, which you wouldn't be required. As I said, I don't have time to go into what those are particularly, but be relieved is all I would say on those. But certainly the remaining 11 notices must be followed to the letter. We've mentioned the National Procurement Policy Statement. So we're expecting a new, what we lovingly call the NPPS, to be published probably within a month maybe of the start of the new Procurement Act, maybe sooner. Depends how quickly the government gets round to deciding what overarching policy priorities they want. But we are expecting things very heavy on the social value. So that's not going anywhere. In fact, the new Procurement Act doesn't actually mention the words social value. As mentioned, we talk about maximising public benefit, but this is where you must have regard to. So when you're conducting your procurement, you must have regard to the National Procurement Policy Statement, which might include things like social value, etc. We've mentioned conflicts of interest. So there will be a new formal process in the Procurement Act around assessing and recording conflicts of interest at various stages of the procurement. That is mandatory, and it will be an ongoing requirement to keep and update this conflicts of interest assessment. So again, that's part of that acting with integrity. The competitive flexible procedure. So this is an interesting one. Again, there's quite a lot of talking points. So following the 7 different procedures that were quite strictly set out in the PCR 15 regulations, the new Procurement Act does allow quite a bit of flexibility for contract authorities. So we have the open procedure, which is the one we all know and love, which is tender notice, straight to market, no restriction on competition, invite tenders, get tenders, evaluate, that sort of process. And I suspect still 70-80% of procurement will be done through the open procedure. However, competitive flexible procedure will allow you to design your own procurement procedure under a new sort of flexible process, bearing in mind one of the key requirements around transparency, equal treatment, those sort of things. So what does that mean? Well, it could look like the restricted procedure at the moment, where you undertake an initial engagement, you shortlist suppliers, and then you invite to tender, or it could be several rounds of that. No one kind of really knows at the moment, and I think this will be one that colleagues, let's say the more voracious procurement people, will be keen to test, although no one wants to be the first case law, of course. So competitive flexible procedures is one to watch, and it'll be an interesting process as to how that is done. But you have a lot of flexibility, a lot of leeway to design that process accordingly. And yes, there's more emphasis on, greater emphasis on pre-procurement engagement, and how to engage the market before a procurement starts. So I've already mentioned it is a requirement. So if you are a MAT and you spend over 100 million in any one financial year, some of you would love to spend 100 million, but if any of you do, then you are mandatorily required to publish a notice setting out specified information about proposed public contracts. So that's useful for pre-market engagement, because it gives the market prior knowledge as to what you're planning to procure. If you're not a MAT that procures over 100 million, you can still undertake a planned procurement notice, which is effectively the old PIN, that would enable you to give prior information on a specific procurement. And you can undertake a preliminary market engagement by issuing a preliminary market engagement notice. So you see how all of these processes are linked back to certain transparency notices. So being able to complete those and upload those notices at various points is going to be a key requirement. And yes, we mentioned the routes to market, the open, the flexible, and yeah, direct awards, which I'll come on to direct awards, Victoria, if that's okay. So I feel like that was a lot of verbal, that was a brain dump. And a lot of you may be sat there going, oh, how do I take all this in? This is an awareness. This is just to sort of give you a snippet, a top level understanding as to some of the inclusions, not all, some of the inclusions within the procurement regulations. Don't panic. There is guidance out there and support out there. But yes, Victoria.
Thank you, Nathan. So the Act certainly does bring some exciting changes for schools and trusts, focusing on value for money, transparency and flexibility, but also while streamlining the procurement process and hopefully giving you more freedom, but also ensuring accountability. Nathan, are there any exemptions from these procurement regulations?
Yes, that's sort of good news. There are, but as you would expect, they are limited in their application. The first piece of good news: existing contracts and framework. What if I have an existing contract, or what happens if I have an existing framework, or I procure something on the 22nd of February, issue a contract notice, and then the new Procurement Act kicks in on the day after? What happens to all of that which has already been procured? Well, the good news is it's fine. It remains in force, and it will be we're not applying the Procurement Act 23 ex post facto. It will be based on the current procurement regulations 2015, and will be for the remainder of its duration. That being said, any framework or dynamic purchasing system that is in place after the Act, and that requires extending, must be extended within the first 12 months of the new Act, and cannot remain beyond the 23rd of February 2029. Scary to think that we're talking 5 years away, 4 years away and a bit. But yes, so what we're saying is any existing arrangements, framework, DPS or what have you will need to be re-procured under the new Act before February 2029. So there is no escaping. You can't evergreen extend everything to avoid the new Act. Everyone in the country is in the same boat. So anything that is already in force will need to be re-procured. But in any case, as a procurement professional, I would always say there is a need to re-procure, test the market, and yes, put it back out to competition anyway. Direct awards. So as with anything, let's just say there may be an emergency situation, extreme urgency, which requires the protecting of life. That is one of the justifications for going to a direct award. So this is where you award a contract with a supplier without prior competition. In doing that, however, you're still required to issue, yes, you've guessed it, a notice, transparency notice, which is setting out that you intend to award a contract directly without running a competitive procedure. But these circumstances are there to permit you to do whatever you need to do. But the limitations are it's got to be pretty urgent. So that wouldn't apply if you've simply overlooked the fact that you need to re-procure something because a contract's ending. We're talking serious urgency, protection of life. COVID comes to mind, where, well, let's not talk about PPE. Let's not go there. Below threshold contracts. So in certain cases, contracts below certain thresholds have simpler, more flexible rules, but must still ensure transparency, value for money, and fairness. But the good news for schools is the process. So there is a process in the regulations for below threshold, which is lower value. Schools don't have to follow that, which is a great exemption for schools. Something called vertical and horizontal exemptions. So in-house procurement, say you're purchasing from within a MAT, and wiring money across department, that is exempt. And horizontal, which is between contracting authorities that share a common purpose, will be exempt again from standard rules. I would seek advice on the horizontal one though. Very complicated. I can't go into the specifics on that, but just say there is some provision there. Schools are exempt from something called a payment compliance notice, which is a notice setting out specified information about your compliance with payment terms. There is an implied, which is the next point, an implied term within the new Procurement Act that you have to pay within 30 days of a supplier issuing a valid invoice, and that's an automatic requirement. And you have to issue payment compliance notices, or yet another notice, for awarded contracts. Well, again, schools are exempt from that, sigh of relief. So there are a few exemptions, but as you note, not many. So existing, I think the main news items are existing frameworks, etc., are fine, but you need to re-procure those by February 29 under the new procurement regulations. If you've got a new procurement after February the 24th, it's automatically required under the new Procurement Act, as we know. The direct award provisions, as mentioned, extreme urgency, protection of life, that sort of scenario. So, yes, limited, but they do exist, Victoria.
Thanks, Nathan. So these changes do mean less red tape and more flexibility, allowing schools to focus on what truly matters, and that's providing quality education. Nathan, what are the next steps considering the changes discussed today?
Yeah, great question. And if you're feeling a little bit, if this is the first time you've really sort of looked into this and you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed at this, don't worry, you are amongst friends. There has been a lot of time to prepare, but as I said at the beginning, the good news is there's an extension until February. However, you do need to jump on this. So our recommendation, or my recommendation, is conduct a procurement needs assessment. What is your current procurement maturity level? What is your current procurement arrangements within your school or your MAT? Who is responsible for procurement for a start? Possibly you, given you're on this call. But if not, the person who is will need to be training up on this. I would say establish a contracts register if you don't have one, and a forward procurement plan. One of the things that the new Procurement Act will be unforgiving when it comes to not being prepared around your procurement needs and plan, because of the sheer number of procurement notices required. Remember, 13 of which 11 largely are required by schools, and this covers the whole procurement cycle, so from pre-procurement right through to how contracts are managed. And as I said, there's contract details notice, there's a contract termination notice, there's contract performance notice. So if you're not aware of what contracts you have, and if you don't have someone that's responsible for those, and your operating model and procurement is quite devolved, then I would say that's a bit of a risk in terms of the requirement to place these notices, keep on top of your procurement portfolio, your contracts portfolio, etc. So my primary advice is get data on your contracts, what you've got coming up, etc., and then you can plan your calendar, your procurement calendar around that, as to when do we need to issue notices, when do we need to do this, etc., etc. That has to be underpinned by the second point, which is a procurement policy. Yes, policies are great in the respect that it is something that is mandatory to follow. It is incumbent upon staff to follow. The absence of a procurement policy, and I see it a lot, often means that procurement is very disjointed, very ad hoc. Well, again, the new Procurement Act is not going to be forgiving on that. So if your procurement policy is outdated or you don't have one, and this happens a lot, then consider reviewing and updating that in light of the new Procurement Act. Now, a policy is great, but you also need to equip and enhance your staff, particularly those who are responsible for procurement, and that involves staff training and awareness. So the great news is, I think we've had a record turnout for this webinar, no surprises. So this is part of that enhanced awareness, but access training, undertake that training, it will pay dividends. There is lots of training guidance out there available. I think Victoria will come on to that shortly. So yes, get data, look at your procurement needs, establish your contracts register, your forward procurement plan, what needs procuring when, look at your procurement policy, update that, use your policy to cascade procurement around your MAT and organisation, and deliver staff training and awareness in regard to that policy. The fourth one I'll probably add in is really do consider your procurement operating model. And what I mean by that is, who is responsible for procurement? Has the time come now to finally address the procurement conundrum, which is we really need to get a centralised grip on procurement for our MAT. So if you haven't done that, then I think that would be a good time to start considering that. Yes, it's an important factor in preparing for what are legal obligations. There's no way around this. And just say, we haven't touched on challenges and remedies available to bidders who, or anyone in fact, who finds that a contracts authority has not followed this. Primarily because I don't want to scare you, but also it is a reality that there are continuing remedies available. So should you fail to issue notices, follow processes, follow the transparency requirements, all these things, then yes, there's a very real possibility of legal challenge.
Thank you, Nathan. We have popped a poll into the chat asking which of the following services would you be interested in exploring further with us. So could you please interact with that, and that would be lovely. Thank you. And if you are interested in training and awareness, we are running Procurement Act 2023 awareness days. We are also, which will be delivered in person. which will provide you with the knowledge and practical tools to understand these changes and also improve your procurement strategies and ensure compliance with the regulations. We've currently got 2 locations booked, one in Durham on the 2nd of December and one on the 31st of January in Northampton. And we'll put the link to the booking in the chat, which has a detailed agenda and the booking form if you would like to join us on those days. We are also exploring other venues around the region, so if there's a particular area you would like us to come to, do feel free to put any suggestions in the chat.
Yes, Nathan on the road, talking about procurement. It's exciting. I'm thinking of getting a t-shirt made, especially for this. So yes, if you happen to be near Durham in December, lovely part of the world, and Northampton, equally nice, at the end of January, then yes, very lucky you. That's where we're already booked to come. And if there is interest in a longer online session, then that is something we are seriously considering as well, because recognise it's very difficult to yes, convince a day out from the office. So yes. Okay, thank you.
So this is coming to the end of our webinar, but we do have some future webinars, and the link to book the series of webinars will be popping up in the chat. Don't miss out on the next 2, where we'll talk more about the Procurement Act and review commercial strategies, including planning, governance, assurance and resources to enable the implementation of the new regime and make senior stakeholders more aware. And Nathan, I can't believe we've kept time, and the amount of facts and information you've delivered there has been phenomenal.
It's a key skill, isn't it? Yes. Yes, thank you very much, everyone. Like I say, do not panic with this. There are lots of people in the same position. Don't worry. But yes, do take it seriously and do start looking into this. Yeah, transforming public procurement government website will be very useful to you. So have a look at the Transforming Public Procurement government website. I'm sure the DFE have various things on there as well. So yes, thank you very much for your time.
Yep, thank you for joining us today, because we do appreciate your time and engagement. And as you go forward, just remember that change brings opportunity. So do embrace the new Procurement Act as a chance to innovate and improve. And let's work together to make procurement not just a process, but a strategic advantage for our schools.
Oh, I love that, Victoria. Yes, I like that.
We hope you have a great day, and we look forward to continuing this journey with you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.